Hello everyone, a very warm welcome to my session on Introduction to ASP.NET Web Programming. Myself, I am Shanthi, working as an assistant professor in the Department of Computer Science and Application in DKM College for Women Autonomous, Vellore. Let's move on to the session. Before going to design our web application, we must know what is a web application is. So we must understand what is the basic difference between a web application and a normal application program. A normal application program is the one which we can install in our system that doesn't need an internet connection. We can just install the software and we can utilize whenever we need it. But our web application is not like that. We have to fetch that web application from a web server. It is not residing in our system. It is going to reside in a web server, right? In order to access that web application from a web server, we are in need of internet connection, first thing. Next thing, what we are in need of, in the sense, we need a web browser to access that web application from a web server, right? So we'll go with the definition of web application. A web application or web app is an application software that turns on a web server, unlike computer-based software programs that are run locally on the operating system of the device. Web applications are accessed by the user through a web browser with an active network connection, right? So for example, we can take our email web application. We are accessing our email with help of internet connection, and we are going to access the email server to read or write some of the mails, right? Similarly, some of the other examples are online retail sales, online banking, and online auctions. So these are all some of the examples of web application. Some of the examples for application programs are normal Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, or even Microsoft Paint, MS Paint. So these things are examples of application program, right? So this accessing of web application from a web browser needs a client-server architecture. What is client-server architecture in this sense? So it is a model for PCs to connect to other computers. So if we are in a network connection, the systems are get connected under a network connection in the sense, for their connecting establishment, they are going to follow a architecture called client-server architecture. What this client-server architecture means? A node from one side that is going to request some service or information from another node or another system in that network. The requesting system becomes the client, and the one which is going to respond for this request is called the server, right? So here we are going to access this web application from a web browser, from a web server. So here the requesting end becomes the client, that is the web browser becomes the client, and the receiving end becomes the web server, right? So browser becomes web client and the server becomes the web server. Okay, so the client server model, a computational model for PCs to connect other computers like the monitor and mainframe architecture model. Here the client sends a request, whereas the server answers the request, right? So after the architecture, what we are going to see is that the protocol, what we are going to use in this communication, right? We are going to access the web application from a web browser to the web server. In this, if we are in a network, while there is a communication, the systems must follow a protocol. A protocol is nothing but set of rules or regulations, or it is a procedure that to be followed while a communication is happening in a network. The same here also, we need to follow a protocol, and that protocol is HTTP here, that is Hypertext Transfer Protocol. What is a protocol? Set of rules or procedures for transmitting data between electronic devices, and here we are utilizing HTTP protocol, that is Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Moving on to the next slide. A browser displays pages defined using HTML tags, right? So what is HTML? HTML is a basic language which is used to create a web page. A web page can be either static or dynamic. What is the difference between a static page and a dynamic page? A static page is the one that doesn't undergo any change, whereas the dynamic web page is the one which undergoes change, in the sense it will respond to the user request. It will change according to the user input to the web page, right? So the static pages not going to change, dynamic pages formed dynamically according to the request. The application itself is defined on a web server such as IIS. So what is IIS? Internet Information Service. This is the standard web server we are going to utilize to create our ASP.NET application, right? So this is used to create a web application and to implant that in the web server IIS. If we are installing Microsoft Visual Studio.NET, so the default web server what we are going to utilize is this IIS, right? So how the communication happens between this web server and other servers, in the sense the web server can contact with other servers like database management system server and even other servers to get informations communicated. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. So this is the pictorial representation of how communication has been established from a web browser and a web server, right? This web browser, that is a client, is going to request a web page from the web server. For that, we are going to give a request called www.myapp.com/welcome.aspx. We are going to request a web page from a website, right? The response is that what page it has been requested, that will be given as response to the client from the web server. So this is the sample HTTP request. So this is the sample HTTP request we have. It starts with HTTP, specifies the protocol, and started with /sundown.wou.edu, which specifies the domain name. So domain name or nothing but the website address, what we are going to, from where we are going to fetch that page. Okay, next it specifies the path of that file. In that web server where this file is located. So that path, it has been mentioned here, and followed with the name of the file. Name of the web page or name of the file which we are going to access, that is specified here. It is mail.html, and it has been followed with a question mark. This question mark specifies the start of a parameter. What do you mean by a parameter? A parameter is nothing but the user input, what we are giving or what we are getting from a web page. It can be considered to the parameters which can be given for a function in C and C++ programming. It is similar to that only. Here we are passing two parameters, so parameter 1 and parameter 2. So this is the sample HTTP request, what we are giving from a web browser to a web server. Right, moving on to the next slide. What are dynamic pages? So a dynamic page, as we already mentioned, it will undergo change based upon the user's request. A dynamic page is generated each time it is called. So whenever we are calling it, even for example, if we are trying to log into our email in the sense, we have to give username and password. So a page is open, and in that we are going to give our username and password. If we are typing our password mistakenly in the sense, the same page is sent to the server and it return bounces back with the error message that your password is wrong, right? This has been mentioned here. A dynamic page is generated each time it is called. Okay, so based upon the user input, the page gets changed. Okay, the same page may be posted back to the server for processing. Nevertheless, the page itself is stateless. What do you mean by state? A state is nothing but the information what the user gives or what the page holds at that time when the page is being processed. Usually this will not be stored in any of the web browser. Then it becomes stateless. That is, the information stored in that variable will not be last for more time. Okay, so this will be erased off. Okay, so it becomes stateless. Even we may make this variable as stateful. How? In the sense, so we can use these methods to hold the information back. So for example, if I am storing my mail ID's password while I am logging in the sense, it will be remembered when once again if I am getting logged in, right? So that way we can retain the state of a page, right? State refers to the values of a variable or object. Variable is a web page. In a web page is stateless, meaning that they do not remember their previous value. They doesn't remember the previous value what the user had given. So methods used to maintain a variable state include use view state, session or application state object. Static variable we can use if we are utilizing C# programming, and you can use cookies, and even we can use some database to store all this informations. So moving on to the next slide. So how an ASPX file will be created. What is this ASPX in the sense? If we are creating a web application in Visual Studio.NET, two basic files will be created with extensions .aspx and .aspx.cs. Okay, so here the presentation and the business logic will be separated. So the presentation will be stored in .aspx file and the business logic will be stored in the .aspx.cs file. If we are choosing the basic language or the code based language in this web application program as C# in the sense, the extension will be .aspx.cs. If we are choosing it as Visual Basic in the sense, the extension will be aspx.vb. Okay, so with this I am winding up. Thank you for watching.